I shared in the last segment a brief clip of the president's remarks yesterday saying that we would defeat ISIS with ideas. What was that? I love those commercial parodies that they do at Rush Limbaugh's show, where they do the parody songs. And there was one that they did several years ago. You may recall this, where the president, who has decided we can no longer go out and interrogate prisoners with old methods, is interviewing a prisoner, and finally he says, well, he's going to entertain him with some of his speeches from the 7th grade, and you hear President Obama reciting the Gettysburg Address. Oh, 7 years ago, they're just blathering on, and the terrorist says, no, I will talk. And he said, go ahead, ask me any question. And the president says, do you now, or have you ever had a health care plan? And the terrorist says, what? It nails the man's worldview. I mean, it shows you how out of touch he is with everyday reality. This is a guy who at one time, you may remember, was not only a community organizer, but he was teaching at a college. And he is the guy, the faculty lounge debater. And he thinks these guys are going around the Middle East and they are burning people alive. They're putting people in cages, dunking them into pools and drowning them, and they're filming it for their own enjoyment. I guess they just go pleasure themselves while they watch the videos. And then, that doesn't need any explaining, does it? I hope not. They do these things, and one of the tricks they were doing recently was they were tying up their prisoners, sticking them in cars, locking the car doors, and then shooting the cars with rocket-propelled grenades. So they're bloodthirsty savages who enjoy killing, and then they enjoy watching the videos of their killings, and they're looking for innovative ways to kill people. It's 9:25. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. But, they're members of the religion of peace.
So the United States will continue to do our part by working with partners to counter ISIL's hateful propaganda, especially online. We'll constantly reaffirm through words and deeds that we will never be at war with Islam.
We're going to combat them online. I'm going to order their Twitter feed shut off. By golly, you'll have them quaking at the knees. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hey, Bill. I heard a rumor that you've got something about California Volvo drivers.
California Volvo drivers. Sorry,
yeah.
Not sure.
Oh, okay. I just heard a couple comments on there, and I just want to let you know that not all California Volvo drivers are flaming liberals. There's a few of us conservatives out there.
I briefly had a Volvo wagon myself back in the early 90s. And
those are good cars.
And then, and thank you for the call. I got rid of the thing, and I didn't really get rid of it. The spouse got rid of me, and she kept the Volvo wagon. And the fellow she moved into the house afterwards, as my daughter said, quote, smashed it up, unquote. So that was the end of the Volvo wagon. 927. So, I used to use that phrase once in a while, hemp clothing driving Volvo, or, hemp clothing wearing Volvo driving granola chomping liberals, but I haven't used it in a long, long time. It's 927. Bill Colley with you. Where did that come from in the middle of a discussion about ISIS? Must be calling from Oregon. Well, I'm just saying, it's got to be a warm day today, about 90 before it all wraps up. One other quick comment from the President of the United States. I was watching General Dempsey stand behind him as the president was talking yesterday. And I don't know, if you were to sit down on a stick and end up impaled, General Dempsey had that sort of look on his face that you might get in that particular situation. I can't believe that these guys, they have to publicly, Stanley McChrystal got fired for saying what he really thought about Obama and Biden. And he was a brilliant general and just mopping up the floor with the enemy in Afghanistan. But he had to go because he told the truth. These other guys, they just stand there hoping that they can get to retirement while they listen to this guy blather on.
We're also going to insist on partnering with Muslim communities as they seek security, prosperity, and the dignity that they deserve. And we're going to expect those communities to step up in terms of pushing back as hard as they can in conjunction with other people of goodwill.
Other people of goodwill. Huh? Is that like a Christmas carol or something? And you know, we've got to respect their dignity. You know, Franklin Roosevelt, who might be a role model for Barack Obama when it comes to socialist government, had a completely different approach to war. You still go to places like Dresden and in Hamburg in Germany, and they're still picking up the bricks. And the buildings, you can see all the charring on the side of them. This was how we dealt with that situation. Harry Truman was a Democrat. Harry Truman simply went over and said, I got to get this war finished. You know what? We'll just start nuking these cities. Bang, bang, done. Why are we even, I think the word is pussyfooting around with all of this. When I saw a map the other day of the territory that this group of bandits controls, just napalm them. I mean, for crying out loud, just to fly a straight line over and just gone. My mother used to do that when we had anthills in the backyard near our plum trees. She'd just go out and she'd pour kerosene down the anthills and then toss matches, and sometimes 15, 20 feet away an anthill would go poof. Worked like a charm. I've got more coming up, believe me. You may have been hearing some discussion sometimes when you're listening to our radio station. You'll hear a promotion mentioning our Click and Win contests. Just to let you know, of course, that that's taking place right now. You can go to our website. Well, see, that's the idea. You know, we drive traffic to the website, newsradio1310.com. It's not, you know, we're not trying to put one over on anybody. That's just how it works. And we should point out that Wendell Tire Factory's Hit the Road Summer Sale is on through July 15th. You can save up to $70 in mail-in rebates on a set of 4 select light truck and passenger tires from Cooper. Buy with confidence with Wendell Tire Factory's Best in the West tire warranty, free flat repair, free rotation, free mounting, free air check, free tire inspection, and free road hazard. Always the right tire, always the right price. Trust what you love to Wendell. Wendell Tire Factory, we should point out, WendellTireFactory.com. Some restrictions may apply. See store for details. I remember that cartoon. There was a Warner Brothers cartoon where these people end up with a giant baby, and the baby's actually teething on white wall tires. I used to love the look of white wall tires when I was a kid. There was something about a car when it was going down the street and it was all shined up, and the tires were all scrubbed up, and they had the white walls. It just was a... People, of course, are much more utilitarian today. 9:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story 76. And, of course, you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. Has anybody heard the update about Lynn Russell? You may remember her back in the day before there was Fox News and before there was MSDNC. The only player in cable news was CNN, and CNN had 2 networks. They had a network we called in the news business the long form. That was where they did actual talk shows, Larry King, for instance, and more longer discussions. And then they had something called Headline News. And every half hour they would do an updated newscast. And it went on for 48 shows per day. Lynn Russell was an anchor on both channels when I was a young man. When I was still in college, Lynn Russell had started working at CNN. And then she retired in the early 2000s and moved on. Last I knew, she was actually hosting a radio program in Toronto. And, it still spends a lot of time in the United States, and she writes novels and the like. You heard the story last week. She and her husband were traveling, and they were in New Mexico, and some guy, she walked into the motel room after running out to the car to get something from the truck, and she walked in, and there was a convicted felon who was standing there with a gun, and he demanded money, and he ended up shooting her husband 3 times. His mistake, though, with the husband is a Green Beret. And 3 bullets just kind of winged him. just a flesh wound, as they say in Monty Python. And he only needed 1 shot to drop the convicted felon. And he saved us a trial, too, because the guy crawled into the parking lot and then, as they say in the medical industry, expired. I wonder if that was a little bit like the movie, what was the movie with Patrick Swayze where he was a ghost and he'd run around, and you remember when some guy would get killed who was a bad guy, these ink blots would come up from out of the ground, and then they'd grab the screaming ghost and drag it away to hell. Kind of like that, I suppose. The guy who planned to rob Lynn Russell and her husband didn't get very far. Well, she's taking some heat from all of this. Now, I met Lynn Russell in Texas. I was at a radio and television news directors conference way back, and Lynn Russell came to a garden party that was going on one night and chatted with a bunch of us who happened to be there. I remember she was very tall. She might have been taller than I was. And I also remember that she had on orange denim pants. I only bring that up because men could never wear that. Men can wear blue and black, maybe some sort of cream color, but they could never get away with the orange. But that's what she was wearing that night when she was at the event. She has been criticized. Now, she's a former sheriff's deputy, too. She grew up in a military family. Her father was a career military man. So she's a pretty tough broad, if you can put it that way. Daily Caller has this. Ex-CNN anchor Lynn Russell has a strong message for gun control activists after her husband, former CNN reporter Chuck DeCaro, saved the couple's lives by fatally shooting an armed felon who opened fire on them in their Albuquerque motel room last week. And here's a quote from her. Quote, "If you don't want to carry, please don't," unquote, she told Fox 411. And then I'm going to abbreviate this next quote, she said. Quote, "Then shut the blank up about it. Make your own decisions," unquote. Except she didn't say blank. She said something that was a little more colorful. But gun control advocates have been having a tizzy about the fact that this criminal got shot dead. Oh, good golly. I mean, he's a victim too, don't you know? That's why he had to resort to a life of crime. And you rich former CNN anchors, you should have just given him everything you had and then let him kill you. And then he could feel better about himself and become self-actualized. No, but instead, in the middle of his, how's he going to feed his family now that you killed him? I can only think that the left is just out there trying to wring its hands because a good guy with a gun stopped a bad guy with a gun. And the Russells are both, well, the Russells, his name is DeCaro, they're both actually licensed to carry. She pointed out this guy wasn't. Her point being that, good people actually do this the right way. Bad people are going to have the guns no matter what. 9:40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Somebody in one of our neighboring states is going to court today in an argument over whether they should be forced to bake cakes for a same-sex wedding. Details on that coming up in a few minutes. I was a little concerned we were going to have to spend a few minutes here just listening to some of the music in my file. I went to turn the microphone on, and the little red light didn't come on. And then I realized that was because the little yellow button beneath it was stuck. Got to stop pounding on these. I was told one time when I was typing at work that somebody said, "You got something against the keyboard? I'm just a little heavy-handed sometimes." Now, this comes from when I used to drive older automobiles. You remember the old cars you used to buy, the big ones? The first cars I ever owned were usually large. They were Buicks, they were Oldsmobiles, and those old cars, when you closed the doors, you could just slam that door, and with big clunk sound. And then everything had to become smaller and more plastics, and now you get that snap sound. That's not an automobile. 9:44, Bill Colley with you, 76. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. If you'd like to reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. Also, my email address is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. A Washington Examiner today, religious liberty test for Supreme Court. The Colorado Supreme Court last week struck down a first-of-its-kind school voucher program that allowed parents to send their children to private schools. The judges ruled it was 4-3, though it was close, 4 Democrats versus 3 regular people. The judges ruled that the voucher program violated a state constitutional provision prohibiting public funds from going to religious schools. Shouldn't that be your choice? Just if you didn't have to, just tell everybody, all right, take that tax money you give us every year and pick your own school. That's all we're asking for. Well, the writer goes on. I've talked to some people at the Patriots Night last Thursday who are opening a Christian school locally. And they're going to find, I'm sure, there are going to be hurdles that they have to go up against. Likely teachers' unions that are thinking more about, I see cake over there. How can I get more of that cake for retirement? Let's push little children out of the way and let's race over to the cake table. Almost immediately, the writer says, anti-school choice groups such as the American Civil Liberties Union was any pressure group ever so appropriately or inappropriately named, the writer says, and Americans United for Separation of Church and State filed suit and hobbled the program by calling it unconstitutional. The writer says this is nonsense, though, and he said it's shamefully tendentious. He says voucher funds could have been spent at any of the 23 district-approved private schools, 7 of which have no religious affiliation. And I think that they're making a nice point here. This is going to go on now to a higher court. But they don't want your kids being exposed, obviously, to something like, well, gadzooks, perhaps Christianity. How can they better turn them into future automatons just working for the Obama White House or whoever's in charge at the time? And then here's another one. This could be the next big Supreme Court gay rights case. This is from the Daily Caller. A Christian legal firm will fight in court Tuesday for a Christian baker in a case that could be the next big Supreme Court decision on gay rights. I don't like the word gay. I mean, I'll throw it into a headline on our website because it helps increase the search engine, that people can take a look at it. But gay means happy. And this whole notion that we've changed the language in order to, it's a public relations move to promote a certain lifestyle and to make people more comfortable with it. That's what that's all about. A friend of mine owned a radio station in West Virginia. He's a Southern Baptist minister. Whenever he hears the word gay come out of my mouth, I think the fact that he's a Christian is the only thing that prevents him from slapping me. The Alliance Defending Freedom is representing a Christian cake maker against the American Civil Liberties Union and a gay couple during oral arguments before the Colorado Court of Appeals. The ATF attorney arguing the case told the Daily Caller News Foundation that this case, or another like it, will ultimately end up before the Supreme Court. Jack Phillips has been living his passion of baking cakes for more than 40 years and has owned his own bakery, now called Masterpiece Cake Shop, for 20. He doesn't bake cakes for Halloween, and he doesn't open on Sundays, out of religious conviction. So it seems to me he may have a good case here. Look, if Muhammad Ali couldn't go fight exhibitions for the U.S. Army because his Nation of Islam faith, which killed, of course, one of its leading lights, Malcolm X, and the court sided with him, then I think the court could probably side with someone who goes to church every Sunday and has such strong beliefs. Oh, also, in Oregon, the Klein family, they are now legally required as a result of a judge's order issued Thursday to, quote, cease and desist from publishing, circulating, issuing, or displaying, or causing to be published any communication to the effect that any of the accommodations will be refused, withheld from, or denied to, or that any discrimination be made against any person on account of their sexual orientation, unquote. In other words, this is a family that didn't want to get involved with what they thought would harm their own consciences when it came to same-sex marriage, and they weren't going to bake any cakes. So they did an interview with a Christian network and just shared they did their testimony. A judge has said they can't do that any longer. Can you believe that? He is silencing them from talking about their Christian faith. His name, by the way, Avakian. Now, I don't know, that name doesn't mean anything really other than, one parent was of a certain ancestry or partially of that ancestry, but that is Armenian, that name, which would mean that he's probably from a Roman Catholic family. But the problem is, once you actually go through law school, I guess, they turn you into a liberal, and what you did in the past doesn't matter. Coming up, Mike Gallagher in just a moment. Brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. We had the very same conversation a couple of months ago about that Origo program on air. And I think Steve Millington was in studio, and we were talking about how, if it brings in a lot of dough for the state of Oregon, naturally there are going to be people who will suddenly monkey see, monkey do, who will suggest it in Boise. And they'll say, yeah, we should do that, because the state still has, what is the number? The figure was $250 million, wasn't it, that was needed? Something along those lines. It was a huge number to fix roads and bridges in Idaho. And the current plan, and every time I drive by the gas station, I just cringe, but the current plan, some places it's $3 a gallon. Look, In January, we were down to $1.50 in some spots. How did this happen? Oil did drop about $4 a barrel yesterday, but you won't be seeing that for a while. And see, here's the thing. This is the way this commodity works. If the price drops $4, but see, the options on that price are being purchased, sometimes weeks to a couple of months ahead, right? So what we've got going on is that oil will not drop then in price until they use up what we already have in the pumps, which was purchased at a more expensive price. Now, on the other hand, if the price of oil jumps $4, or let's say $10 today, the price tomorrow will go up immediately, even though what you're paying for was purchased at a lower price. It doesn't make sense. I know that, but that's how that works. Hey, speaking of options, I had an email from a friend of mine. He's a very shrewd player when it comes to markets and investments and the like. And I had sent him a link yesterday from David Stockman. I signed up for David Stockman's blog after he had that piece last week where he said the real unemployment rate was 42% in this country. Because if you're talking about people who are underemployed, et cetera, and no longer looking for work, and Stockman had some comments yesterday about the markets and the directions they happen to be going. And I sent it to a friend and said, what do you think of this? And he wrote me back and he said, let me tell you something. He said, the actual stock trading that goes on, people think that that's what this is all about, but the profit is actually in the options, which is an entirely different thing. A guy buys stocks, and then and he said, when you hear people say, well, there's a flash crash, somebody with fat fingers touched the wrong key, he said, it's not even done that way any longer. It's all automated. He said, so there's something else going on here. Options are like 100 shares at a time, and what you do, a guy goes to a trader and says, I want to buy this much. But it takes about a week before they get everything completed. So somebody else is betting on that transaction through options. And according to my friend, and he's agreeing with David Stockman, we are riding a precarious wave right now, and if a few more countries default on their obligations, such as Greece, according to my friend, we could see a tumble in that market, a correction of all corrections. So just something to keep in mind. But he also says, you don't put all of your eggs into one basket. What you simply do is, you got to look for a lot of different places. And I think that any financial advisor would tell you the same thing. You got to spread it around a little bit because sometimes one area is not. I remember when I was in the Voyager Fund back in the 1990s, and I would get my statement every few months, and I had it divided up into 4 different areas. Some things worked out well, some quarters, and sometimes others didn't. You had to be careful and you had to be patient, and you had to have a high risk tolerance in that situation. But according to some of what David Stockman is saying, risk tolerance may just be simply kind of at this stage of the game. You're simply a gambler and you don't mind losing if you're in. 9:58, Bill Colley with you this morning. Hey, coming up tomorrow, of course, as I mentioned a bit earlier, we are going to be visiting with Russell Singleton. He is a physician assistant from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls. They're on Fillmore Street. Hope you can join us for that conversation. He'll be able to take some of your telephone calls, questions you may have. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, I get to do that show tomorrow between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning. The Rush Limbaugh program is on the way following. Rush was going to take Monday off anyway, I think. Didn't he say that? Didn't he say he was taking Monday off because he thought that should be the 3-day holiday weekend and not Friday? But his show is scheduled next following news at 10 o'clock. And then Sean Hannity following 1 o'clock. And, of course, Glenn Beck is taking some time off because he strained his vocal cords. But they'll have somebody step up to the plate today who I'm sure is just fine. That's all ahead on News Radio 1310 KLIX.